There comes a moment in your life when you start to notice a shift, subtle at first but undeniable. It's like an inner stirring, a quiet pull towards something deeper, more meaningful. You can't quite explain it, but you feel drawn to stillness, to moments of reflection, to a presence that seems to meet you right where you are. That's one of the first signs you're growing closer to God. A genuine desire for His presence. Not because someone told you to pray more or read more scripture, but because something inside of you longs for that connection. It's interesting how this happens. You might wake up one morning and instead of reaching for your phone, you find yourself wanting to sit quietly, just breathing, just being. Maybe you used to rush through prayers, checking them off a mental list, but now they feel different, like a conversation rather than a chore. You're no longer just speaking words into the air, you're aware of someone listening. And that awareness creates this beautiful sense of peace, like you've stepped into a space where the noise of the world fades and clarity takes its place. What's fascinating is that this desire for God's presence doesn't always come through dramatic experiences. Sometimes it's found in the ordinary, in the way you notice the sunrise a little more, feel gratitude for small moments, or find comfort in silence rather than distraction. It's like your heart is being rewired, your attention shifting from outward noise to inward connection. You begin to crave that space because it feels like home, like the place you were always meant to dwell. And here's the thing, when you start to experience God's presence like this, you realize it's not just about feeling good. It's about transformation. The more time you spend in that space, the more you begin to see yourself differently. Old fears start to lose their grip. Stressful situations don't rattle you the way they used to. It's not that life suddenly becomes perfect, but you're anchored in something deeper than circumstance. You're grounded in a presence that reminds you who you truly are, beyond your achievements, beyond your mistakes, beyond the labels the world places on you. What's truly remarkable is how this desire begins to shape your choices. The things that once seemed fulfilling, endless scrolling, constant busyness, chasing approval, start to feel hollow. Not because you're forcing yourself to be more spiritual, but because your soul has tasted something more satisfying. You find yourself drawn to moments of solitude, not loneliness, but solitude filled with peace. You start to pray not just when you need something, but because it feels like reconnecting with the very source of life itself. And you start to notice how this desire extends beyond personal moments. You become more present with people, more patient, more compassionate, because when you've been in the presence of perfect love, it's hard not to reflect that love outward. You listen more deeply, speak more kindly, and carry yourself with a quiet confidence. Not arrogance, but the assurance that you are walking in alignment with something greater than yourself. Now, some might hear this and think, well, that sounds nice, but I don't feel that pull. Does that mean I'm far from God? Absolutely not. Sometimes the desire for God's presence starts as nothing more than restlessness, a sense that there must be more to life than routine. Even that restlessness is an invitation. It's God gently nudging you, saying there's more, come closer. And the moment you respond, even with the smallest step, that desire begins to grow. The beauty of it all is that God's presence isn't reserved for the perfect, the religious, or the spiritually elite. It's for anyone willing to pause, to turn their attention toward the divine, even if just for a moment. And the more you lean into that, the more you realize that this desire isn't something you manufacture. It's God's way of drawing you deeper into the life you were always meant to live, a life marked by peace, purpose, and unshakable joy. The truth is, once you've tasted that closeness, everything else starts to pale in comparison. It's not about escaping the world, but about engaging with it from a place of wholeness. You walk differently, speak differently, love differently, not because you're trying to be better, but because you've been in the presence of the one who transforms you from the inside out. So if you've been feeling that pull, whether it's a quiet nudge or an undeniable longing, don't ignore it. Lean into it, make space for it, because that desire isn't random, it's sacred. It's the first sign that you're not just surviving life, you're stepping into the fullness of who you were created to be, and that's where everything changes. There's something interesting that happens when you start growing closer to God. It's not just about feeling more peaceful or having more clarity. It's about what starts to shift inside you, the way you become more aware of your thoughts, your choices, your actions. It's like a light gets turned on and you start noticing things you might have overlooked before. That's what conviction feels like. It's not shame. It's not guilt. It's an invitation to grow. You see, the closer you get to God, the more you become aware of anything that stands in the way of that connection. It's like when you're tuning into a radio station. The clearer the signal, the more obvious the static becomes. And that static, that's the stuff in your life that doesn't align with who you truly are, who God created you to be. It's the impatience that used to go unnoticed, the little compromises you'd brush off, the negative self-talk you'd believe without question. Suddenly, they don't sit right with you anymore. And it's not because you're trying to be perfect or follow a set of rules. It's because your heart is changing. What once felt normal now feels heavy, not because God is condemning you, but because your spirit is waking up to something higher. That's the power of conviction. It's like an inner nudge saying, you're made for more than this. This doesn't align with the person you're becoming. But here's where most people get stuck. They confuse conviction with condemnation. Condemnation says you messed up and now you're unworthy. Conviction says you're better than this and I'm here to help you rise above it. One pushes you down, the other lifts you up. And when you're growing closer to God, you start to recognize the difference. You don't dwell in shame. You acknowledge the misstep, but instead of hiding from God, you move toward Him, knowing He's already reaching out to you with grace. What's fascinating is how this awareness begins to affect your daily life. You might find yourself in a conversation, and the moment you speak harshly or gossip, there's this gentle tug in your heart. That's not who you are anymore. Or you're about to make a decision driven by fear or pride, and something inside pauses you. This isn't the path you want to take. It's subtle, but it's undeniable. And the more you listen to that voice, the stronger it becomes. That's the beauty of conviction. It's not there to punish you. It's there to guide you. It's a sign that your heart is softening, becoming more aligned with love, integrity, and truth. And when you embrace it, you start experiencing freedom, because the things you once clung to, the habits, the distractions, the mindsets, they lose their grip. You don't fight against them with willpower alone. You outgrow them because your heart has changed. And here's something else that happens. You become more compassionate, not just toward others, but toward yourself. You realize that growth is a process, and every moment of conviction is an opportunity, not a setback. You don't beat yourself up for falling short. One of the clearest signs that you're growing closer to God is the way your heart begins to change. Not just toward yourself, but toward others. It's subtle at first. You might not even notice it right away. But one day you'll find yourself reacting differently. Where you might have been quick to judge, there's now understanding. Where you used to hold on to resentment, you feel a strange pull toward forgiveness. It's not force. It's not something you're pretending to do because it's the right thing. It's real. It's coming from a place that feels deeper than your own willpower. That's what happens when you get closer to God. His nature starts to shape yours. And God's nature at His core is love. Not the kind of love that's based on convenience or emotion, but the kind of love that sees people beyond their flaws. It's patient. It's kind. It doesn't keep score. It's the love that looks at someone who hurt you, and instead of seeing the offense, sees the brokenness behind it. It's the love that allows you to stand firm in truth while still extending grace. And when that kind of love starts flowing through you, you know something inside has shifted. The interesting thing is this change doesn't always start with the people around you. It often starts with how you see yourself, because the more time you spend in God's presence, the more you realize how deeply loved you are. Not for what you've done, but simply because you exist. And when you truly grasp that, it's almost impossible not to extend the same love to others. You can't give what you don't have, but once you've experienced unconditional love, it starts to overflow naturally. Think about it. When you're insecure, feeling unworthy, it's easy to become defensive, critical, even cold toward others. But when you're secure in God's love, those walls start to fall. You're no longer loving people just to get something in return, whether it's approval, affection, or validation. You're loving because it's who you become. There's a freedom in that. You stop seeing people as obstacles or threats and start seeing them as souls, each one on their own journey, each one deserving of the same grace that's been extended to you. And you'll notice this shift not just with the people you already care about, but with the ones who challenge you. Maybe it's a difficult coworker, a family member who always seems to push your buttons, or even a stranger who cuts you off in traffic. The old you might have reacted with frustration, maybe even anger, but now something inside pauses. There's compassion where irritation used to be. You find yourself thinking, what are they going through? What pain might be driving that behavior? It doesn't mean you become a doormat or tolerate abuse. It means you respond from a place of strength, not woundedness. And that strength comes from love. What's really fascinating is how this change starts to affect your relationships. When you lead with love, conversations soften. Misunderstandings are resolved faster. People feel safer around you because they can sense the difference. You're not just listening to respond, you're listening to understand. You're not quick to assume the worst, you're willing to believe the best. And in that space, real connection happens. But it's not always easy. Loving like this requires vulnerability. It means letting go of pride, choosing forgiveness when you'd rather hold a grudge, and extending kindness even when it's not reciprocated. That's why it's a sign of spiritual growth, because it doesn't come from your own strength. It's the result of God's work in you. You're not just trying to be a better person. You're becoming more like the one who loves without love. And here's the thing. The more you love, the more peace you experience. There's a lightness that comes when you're not carrying the weight of bitterness, judgment, or unmet expectations. You start to see love not as something you give and receive, but as the very environment you live in. It changes how you speak, how you think, how you show up in the world. And the beautiful part, it's contagious. The love you pour out has a way of multiplying, creating ripples that reach further than you'll ever realize. So if you've noticed your heart softening, if you're finding it easier to show grace, to forgive, to extend kindness even when it's inconvenient, don't overlook it. That's not just personal growth, that's spiritual growth. That's evidence that you're walking closer with God, allowing His love to transform you from the inside out. And when love becomes your default, everything around you begins to change. Not because you're trying to fix the world, but because you've allowed yourself to be changed first. There's a moment in your journey toward God when you start to notice something unusual. Life doesn't get easier. Challenges still come. Uncertainties still linger, but somehow you're not as shaken by them. There's this calm, almost unexplainable peace that begins to settle in, like the eye of a storm. It's not denial, it's not pretending everything's fine, it's something deeper, it's trust. Real trust, the kind that doesn't depend on circumstances lining up perfectly, but on knowing that no matter what, you're held. What's fascinating is that this peace doesn't always announce itself with fanfare. It shows up quietly, almost like background music you didn't realize was playing until you stop and really listen. You get disappointing news, and your first reaction isn't panic. It's a deep breath and the thought, okay, this is hard, but I'm not facing it alone. Or you find yourself standing at a crossroads, unsure of what decision to make, but instead of being paralyzed by fear, there's this quiet assurance that says the path will become clear. I don't have to force it. That's how you know you're growing closer to God. Because peace like that, it doesn't come from controlling your environment. It comes from surrendering to something greater than yourself. And surrender, that's not weakness, it's strength. It's the kind of strength that says, I don't have all the answers, but I trust the one who does. Think about how much of our stress comes from trying to predict, control, or prevent outcomes. We overthink conversations, worry about finances, stress over relationships, and obsess about the future. It's exhausting. But when you start to truly walk with God, you realize you were never meant to carry all that weight alone. Peace comes when you finally set it down and say, I've done what I can. The rest is in His hands. And something incredible happens when you live from that place. You start to respond instead of react. When life throws curveballs, because it always does, you don't spiral into worst-case scenarios. You approach problems with clarity because your mind isn't clouded by anxiety. You start to realize that peace isn't the absence of problems, it's the presence of trust. It's like standing in the middle of a forest at night. You might not see the path clearly, but you know the ground beneath you is solid. You know morning will come. That kind of peace rewires the way you approach life. You stop being driven by fear and start being guided by faith. What's even more interesting is how this peace affects the people around you. They'll notice. They'll see you facing challenges with a steady heart, and they'll wonder, how are you so calm right now? It's not because you're ignoring reality. It's because you've anchored yourself to something unshakable. One of the clearest signs that you're growing closer to God is the way your hunger for truth starts to change. It's like a shift happens inside you. Things that once felt satisfying, mindless entertainment, endless distractions, surface-level conversations start to lose their grip. Instead, there's this quiet but undeniable pull towards something deeper. You find yourself wanting more than just words about God. You want to know Him, to understand His heart. And that desire often shows up as a hunger for His Word. At first, it might catch you off guard. Maybe you've read scripture before, but it felt dry, like a list of rules or ancient stories that didn't quite connect to your life. But now it feels alive. You read something you've seen a dozen times, and suddenly it speaks to you in a way it never has before. It's not just knowledge anymore, it's revelation. It's like God is using those words to speak directly to your situation, your thoughts, your heart. And it's not just about reading for the sake of reading, it's about how it starts shaping the way you think, the way you see the world, the way you approach challenges. You'll be in the middle of a stressful moment, and out of nowhere, a verse you barely remember reading will surface in your mind. It's like the Word becomes this internal guide reminding you of truth when everything around you feels uncertain. That's not random. That spiritual growth is evidence that your heart and mind are being renewed, not by willpower, but by truth. What's fascinating is how this hunger starts to affect your priorities. You find yourself carving out time, not because you have to, but because you want to. The same way you make time for anything that nourishes you, you start making time for God's Word. Because you realize it's feeding something deeper than just your mind. It's feeding your spirit. And the more you feed it, the stronger it becomes. You'll notice the difference when life throws you off balance. Instead of defaulting to worry or frustration, your first instinct becomes, what does God's word say about this? Not because you're trying to sound spiritual, but because you've experienced what happens when you build your life on truth rather than emotion. It's like having an anchor in the middle of a storm. The waves still come, but they don't drag you under. And here's the thing, the more you lean into that hunger, the more you realize it's not just about knowledge. It's about relationship, because the word isn't just a book. It's a way God speaks to you, reminds you who you are, and reveals who he is. You start to see how his promises aren't distant ideals. They're invitations to live differently, to think differently, to love differently. But this kind of hunger doesn't come from obligation. It comes from transformation. You're not reading because you're trying to earn favor with God. You're reading because you've tasted what it's like to walk through life with clarity, peace, and purpose. And once you've experienced that, going back to living without it feels empty. You might also notice that this hunger starts to change your conversations. You find yourself wanting to discuss things that actually matter: truth, growth, purpose, because surface level talk just doesn't satisfy anymore. And it's not about becoming preachy or self-righteous. It's about the natural overflow of what's happening inside you. When your heart is full of truth, it's hard not to share it, not to convince others, but because you know how life-changing it's been for you. And the beautiful part, this hunger doesn't lead to restlessness. It leads to peace. It's the kind of hunger that satisfies even as it grows. You're not chasing after something elusive. You're drawing closer to the very source of life itself. And in that closeness, you find clarity, strength, and joy. Not just in the big moments, but in the everyday ones. So when you start noticing that pull toward truth, when you find yourself longing for more than just the noise of the world, that's not random. That's growth. That's God drawing you closer, inviting you to build your life on something unshakable. And when you say yes to that hunger, everything begins to change. Not because life gets easier, but because you're finally rooted in something that lasts. There's a moment in your journey when you realize that the things you used to hold on to, the habits, the distractions, the need for control, start to loosen their grip. It's not that you made a conscious decision to let everything go overnight. It's more like you're outgrowing them. What once felt necessary or even comforting now feels out of place, like wearing clothes that no longer fit. That's when you know you're growing closer to God. Because the closer you get, the more you realize that true freedom doesn't come from holding tighter. It comes from surrender. Surrender is one of those words people often misunderstand. It sounds like giving up, like losing, but spiritual surrender is the exact opposite. It's not about defeat, it's about release. It's about recognizing that the more you try to control everything, your circumstances, other people, even your own timeline, the more anxious and exhausted you become. But the moment you let go, the moment you trust that God's plan is better than anything you could orchestrate on your own, that's when peace enters. That's when clarity comes. It doesn't mean you stop caring or stop trying. It means you're no longer driven by fear. You're no longer making decisions out of scarcity or desperation. Instead, you're moving through life with a sense of trust, knowing that you're being guided even when the path isn't fully visible. You start to see that surrender isn't passive, it's powerful. It takes courage to say, I don't have all the answers, but I'm going to move forward anyway, trusting that what's meant for me won't pass me by. What's fascinating is how surrender starts to shift your perspective. You begin to recognize that many of the things you once stressed about aren't as important as you thought. The need to prove yourself, the need to always have a plan, the constant striving, they start to fade. Not because you've stopped caring, but because you've started trusting. And in that trust, you find freedom. Freedom from the pressure to have it all figured out. Freedom from the anxiety of what if. freedom from the weight of trying to control outcomes that were never fully in your hands to begin with. And here's the interesting part. The more you surrender, the more you realize how much you were holding on to things that weren't serving you. Old grudges, unrealistic expectations, unhealthy relationships, even outdated dreams. They start to fall away. It's not always easy. Sometimes letting go feels like loss. But what you're really losing is the illusion of control. The weight of trying to force something that was never aligned with your highest good. And what you gain in return? Peace, clarity, joy, the kind that doesn't depend on circumstances. You start to see life differently. Challenges don't disappear, but your response to them changes. Instead of reacting with panic or frustration, you pause. You breathe. You remember that you're not navigating life alone. And from that place of surrender, you find solutions you couldn't see when you were operating from fear. It's like standing in the middle of a storm, but knowing the ground beneath you is solid. The wind can blow, the rain can fall, but you're not shaken because you know who's holding you up. Even your prayers begin to change. Instead of asking for specific outcomes, you start asking for alignment. God, guide me toward what's best, even if it doesn't look the way I imagine. And when things don't go as planned, you don't see it as failure, you see it as redirection.